Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Mr. H on YouTube video. Today we are going to be talking about the Ottoman Empire. So we're going to go into the history. Where do the Ottomans come from? How did they impact the course of the Middle East? This is one that I've been thinking about how to best get this done with you guys. The one thing you have to understand about the Ottomans is that they were around for a very, very long time. How long were they around? Well, they start really in the 1400s and they go all the way to 1919. Okay, to keep that just in a little bit of context, uh, the Chicago Cubs won a World Series when the Ottoman Empire was still around. That's a really long time. So let's get into who were the Ottomans, and we have to talk about Osman. Osman was the first real sultan of the Ottoman Empire, and he begins with his attacks in Turkey, and his tribe, the Turks, begin and conquering most of Anatolia, and eventually by the 1400s, the Ottomans have not only taken most of Anatolia, but they've actually crossed over and conquered several areas around the Balkan areas of Greece, Bulgaria, Serbia, Romania, those areas. What made them so good? Well, the Ottomans were very organized. They were very adaptable. They had an elite core of fighters called the Janissaries. And using their lightweight and also heavy troopers, they were able to overwhelm the Byzantine Empire. The Eastern Roman Empire, as we sometimes call them, was basically on its deathbed. They just could not fight the Ottomans anymore. And this, of course, leads to the fall of Constantinople in 1453. The Sultan at the time was a man by the name of Mehmed. He was only in his 20s when he attacked Constantinople. It was one of his great dreams to attack. And so Constantinople, which had been the center of the Eastern world for most of its history, for a thousand years, fell to the Ottomans. The Ottomans used such new technological improvements such as cannons and gunpowder. And eventually, the walls of Constantinople fall. And the Ottomans don't finish there. They begin to conquer basically the whole of the Middle East. They take Palestine, they take Arabia, they take Egypt, and they begin expanding further and further into the territories of Europe, and especially attacking areas like modern day Hungary and Romania. One thing that it's kind of important to understand is that the Ottomans were seen as a major threat by the Europeans, because not only were they a powerful group, but they had united the Muslim world that had not been seen since the beginning of the Muslim conquests almost 800 years before. This was a very powerful group of people, and the sultans of the Ottoman Empire were considered the caliph, the successor to Muhammad. So they were, for the Sunnis, they were not only a very powerful political authority, but they also were a powerful religious authority as well. Well, as the Ottomans expand, they get closer and closer to Austria. Austria was seen as the last line of defense for the rest of the Christian world. The Habsburgs were the most powerful family in Europe. They were the Holy Roman Emperors, and they were also the Dukes of Austria. And so eventually, a few of the sultans finally get to the walls of Vienna in Austria, which is the capital of Austria. And so a long siege begins. And this, for some reason, they have not made this battle into like a major motion picture yet. Because, I think the problem is that you don't really have like a bad guy. You need a good bad guy for these types of movies. So you have the Ottomans who have dug gigantic trenches all around Vienna. Vienna is cut off and they're desperate and they keep sending messengers as much as they can, trying with all of their might. Who will save us? And then, this is just like a perfect Hollywood movie. As the fighting continues, out of nowhere, over the horizon, this gigantic cavalry force of horses come to save Vienna. And it is, of course, the Polish winged hussars. Hussar is a horse rider. And they actually wore those wings that you see in the images. And they come and they smash the Ottoman army, and the Ottomans retreat. And that is the last time they ever threatened Vienna. And so the most of Christian Europe is saved from the Ottomans' conquest, because really there was not much defense outside of Vienna. So the Ottomans continue, and they get to their greatest expansion in the mid 1600s and early 1700s. This was the height of the Ottoman power. But the problem was that the Ottomans were slowly decaying. They were kind of hampered in by several groups that did not want reform. So one of the biggest problems was the elite troops of the Janissaries, which sounds kind of confusing. Let me explain. The Janissaries did not want to reform the army because they were the soldiers. They were the ones in charge. And if the Ottomans had reformed, they might lose all of their rights and privileges. Another group was the clergy, the Muslim priests, the imams, who were in charge of the empire's religious authorities. And those two groups and some other political groups keep the Ottomans from changing. As the Europeans become stronger and stronger, the Ottomans become weaker and weaker and weaker. This weakness of the Ottoman Empire culminates throughout the end of the 1700s and after the Napoleonic Wars. The Ottomans continue to lose territory. This results in nations like Greece becoming independent, and eventually nations like Austria, Hungary, and the Russian Empire slowly pick apart different sections of the Ottoman Empire. As you go through, by the mid 1800s, the Ottomans have basically lost their influence. They are technologically outgunned, and they are surrounded by enemies who are slowly picking them apart. This gets even worse in the 1870s during something called the Congress of Berlin, where the Europeans decide to carve up all of the European territories of the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottomans can't really do anything about it. Why couldn't the Ottomans do anything about it? Well, the biggest reason was that the Ottomans had basically become indebted to the Europeans. British and French bankers had taken over a lot of the finances of the Ottoman Empire, and the Ottoman Empire had defaulted on a lot of loans that they had borrowed. And when you default on your loans, it's not a good thing for your legitimacy. So the Ottomans were slowly declining, and they were known as the sick man of Europe by the other European powers. They were seen as weak, and they were desperate for allies. And so by World War One. In the 1900s, the Ottomans were desperate, and so they joined with Germany and Austria-Hungary in the Central Powers. World War One, if you want to describe World War One for the Ottomans. I can describe it in one word for you. It was a disaster. The Ottomans had some success against the Russians and a few victories against the British, but overall it was a complete and utter failure. Outside by 1917, the Arabian peoples of Saudi Arabia had led a gigantic Arab revolt, and had captured Damascus and Jerusalem, and Baghdad, and all these large Arab cities. By the end of World War One, the Ottoman Empire is a shell of itself. Basically, it only controls a few areas around Constantinople, or Istanbul, as it's known to the Ottomans. After World War One, the European powers had this plan where they were going to divide up most of the Turkey and give it to different European powers. But actually, a man by the name Mustafa Kemal, he's also known as Ataturk in history books, leads a revolt in the 1920s. And by 1922, the Turks have actually defeated the Europeans in the Turkish War for Independence. And so the modern Republic of Turkey is formed, and that is the borders and state of Turkey that we have in modern day. And so that is a brief history of the Ottoman Empire. What was their legacy? Well, the Ottoman Empire is very important to European history. It had defeated the Roman Empire for good this time. It had spread Muslim culture and religion to southeastern Europe, which is still relevant today. It was one of the few world powers that was a Muslim empire. This was not very common. And also, countless works of literature and art were created in the Ottoman Empire. It also, because of their policies, they also fueled the independence movements of several different nations that we know today: Syria, Iraq, Kuwait, Saudi Arabia, Lebanon, Palestine, Turkey, Greece, Bulgaria, all these areas that were once under the Ottoman Empire were began as ideas by nationalities living in this empire. So the Ottoman Empire is a very interesting topic, and feel free after this video, if you have questions more that I didn't get to, go ahead and comment below with your questions. I hope you guys enjoy this video, and I'll see you all soon. Bye-bye.